All right, so he's seen him, and it's not Jekyll. I don't know if he's ever seen Hyde. But anyway, he can assume that it's Hyde anyway. So Hyde's upset. He can't find something. He's even looking through the garbage to see if he can find whatever it is he's looking for. Yeah.
These are all very strange circumstances, said Mr. Utterson, but I think I begin to see daylight. Your master Poole is plainly seized with one of those maladies that both torture and deform the sufferer. Hence, for aught I know, the alteration of his voice, hence the mask and the avoidance of his friends, hence his eagerness to find this drug, by means of which the poor soul retains some hope of ultimate recovery. God grant that he be not deceived. There is my explanation. It is sad enough, Poole, aye, and appalling to consider, but it is plain and natural, hangs well together, and delivers us from all exorbitant alarms.
Okay, before you go on, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. He says, here's another way. It's either Hyde or it's Jekyll with a mask on. Which, when you think about it, is, for those who know what's happening, that's not much different than Hyde. Jekyll with a mask on is the same thing as Hyde. But he says that's, and he's going through some physical torment, and he doesn't want anybody to see it, so he's covering his face. That's why it didn't look like him. But he's trying to protect Jekyll for some reason. They're always trying to protect each other's reputation in the Victorian period. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. It doesn't really matter about your character. Are you really a good person inside? That doesn't matter. It's what's on the outside that counts. That's kind of a simplified version of what is a major issue in the Victorian period. So anyway, that shows up here. We got to protect his reputation. Wouldn't want his name to get out there as anything bad. So you want to keep reading or pass it?
I pass it.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, said the butler, turning to a sort of model caller. What thing was not my master? And there's the truth. My master, here he looks round and turns again to whisper, is a tall, fine-built man, and this is more of a dwarf. Utterson attempted to protest. Oh, sir, cried Poole, do you think I do not know my master after 20 years? Do you think I do not know where his head comes to the cabinet door? Where I ask him every morning of my life? No, sir, that thing in mask was never Dr. Jekyll. God knows what it was, but it was never Dr. Jekyll, and it is the belief of my heart that there was a murder done.
And as you recall, they keep making, I said this from the very moment we met Hyde, is that Hyde's always described as small. And the reason I keep bringing that up is because there's a reason for that. When you find out the reason, I think you say, well, that's pretty clever. I mean, as far as the writer who made this up. But just keep, he's always shorter. Keep reading.
Poole replied to the lawyer, if you say that, it will become my duty to make certain. Much as I desire to spare your master's feelings, much as I am puzzled by the snow which seems to prove him to be still alive, I shall consider it my duty to break in that door. Ah, Mr. Utterson, that's talking, cried the butler. And now comes the second question, resumed Utterson. Who is going to do it? Why, you and me, sir, said was the undaunted reply. That's very well said, replied the lawyer. And whatever comes of it, I shall make it my business to see you are no loser. There's an axe in the theater, continued Poole, and if you might take the kitchen poker for yourself. The lawyer took that rude but weighty instrument into his hand and balanced it. Do you know, Poole, he said, looking up, that you and I are about to place ourselves in a position of some peril? You may so, sir, indeed, replied the butler. It is well then that we should be said the other. We both think more than we have said. Let us make a clean breast. This masked figure that you see, did you recognize it? Well, sir, it went so quick, and the creature was so doubled up that I could hardly swear to that was the answer. But I mean, was it Mr. Hyde? Why, yes, I think it was. You see, it was much the same bigness, and it had the same quick, light way with it. And then who else could have got in the laboratory door? You have not forgot, sir, that at the time of the murder, he still had the key with him. But that's not all. I don't know, Mr. Utterson, if you ever met this Mr. Hyde.
All right, thanks, Lily.
Yes, said the lawyer, I once spoke with him, and you must know as well as the rest of us that there was something queer about the gentleman, something that gave a man a turn. I don't know rightly how to say it, sir, beyond this, that you felt in your marrow kind of cold and thin. I own I felt something of what you described, said Mr. Utterson. Quite so, sir, replied Poole. Well, when that masked thing like a monkey jumped from among the chemicals and whipped into the cabinet, it went down my spine like ice. for that, but a man with his feelings, and I gave you my Bible word, it was Mr. Hyde.
Circle the word monkey, because he's always described as animal, not human. And when you realize what the whole point of this thing is, that will mean more to you, that Mr. Hyde is a lower, morally, lower human. You know, when he sunk so low morally that, you know, it's almost like he has none morals, like an animal. Yeah.
Why is he always described as an animal?
What I just said, because he's become less and less human because of his actions, behavior, his morality is so.
What does he do? What is behavior?
Well, he's killed a man,
Yeah.
and there are other things that they'll allude to later, but well, remember where he lives. He lives in the red light district of town, so it suggests that there's some probably things like that, sexually immoral, but he never mentioned that because it's a Victorian book. He couldn't say that. He couldn't talk about that. That sounds crazy by our standards, but he doesn't. It's just, you know, he can talk about the physical violence, but not the other.
Aye, said the Lord, my fear is inclined to the same point. Evil I fear founded, evil was sure to come. Of that connection, I believe you. I believe poor Harry was killed, and I believe his murderer, for what purpose God alone can tell, is still lurking in the victim's room. Well, let our name be vengeance. Call our Bradshaw. The footman came at the summons, very white and nervous. Put yourself together, Bradshaw, said the lawyer. This suspense I know is telling upon all of you, but it is now our intention to make an end of it. Poole here and I are going to force our way into the cabinet. If all is well, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the blame. Meanwhile, lest anything should really be amiss, or any malefactor seek to escape by the back, you and the boy must go round the corner with a pair of good sticks and take your post at the laboratory door. We give you 10 minutes to get to your station.
He's smart enough to know if there's a back door, you know, you gotta have that covered, so he sends Poole and the other guy with some weapons to the back door if he tries to escape that way. And Utterson, wait a minute, let's see, is Utterson with him? Can't remember who's with him. Well, there are two people in the back door, and then there's Utterson and Poole in the front door of the room. Let's see what happens. Why don't we go?
Alright. As Bradshaw left, the lawyer looked at his watch, and now Poole, let us get to our, she said, and taking the poker under his arm, led the way into the yard. The scud had banked over the moon, and it was now quite dark. The wind, which only broke in puffs and draughts into the deep well of the building, tossed the light of the candle to and fro about their steps, until they came into the shelter of the theater, where they sat down silently to wait. London hums solemnly all around, but near at hand, the stillness was only broken by the sounds of footfall moving to and fro along the cabin floor. So it will walk all day, sir, whispered Poole. In the better part of the night, only when a new sample comes from the chemist, and there's a bit of a break. It's an ill
Conscience.
right? Conscience has such an enemy to rest, Oscar. There's blood falling shed in every step of it, but heart again a little closer and push her heart and her fingers, Mr. Anderson. And tell me, is that the doctor's foot?
So again, the pacing back and forth, almost like an animal, you know, a caged animal. He calls it it. It, that's Poole. He says, it will walk all day, sir. So again, if you hadn't figured out by now, he's connecting Hyde. People have skin, animals have hide. So it's more and more of that kind of inhuman kind of thing.
The steps fell lightly and oddly with a certain swing. For all they went so slowly, it was different indeed from the heavy creaking tread of Henry Jekyll. Utterson sighed. Is there never anything else? He asked. Poole nodded. Once, he said. Once I heard it weeping. Weeping? How's that? Said the lawyer, conscious of a sudden chill of horror. Conscious of a sudden chill of horror. Weeping like 10 minutes drew to an end, Poole disinterred the axe from under a stack of packing straw. Count was set upon the nearest table to light them to the attack. When they drew near with bated breath, for the patient's foot was still going up and down, in the quiet of the night. Jekyll, cried Utterson with a loud voice, I demand to see you. Pause a moment, but there came no reply. I give you fair warning. Our suspicions are aroused, and I must and shall see you, he resumed. If not by fair means, then by foul. If not by your consent, then by brute force.
Yeah, oh, Tucker.
Utterson said the voice, for God's sake, have mercy. Oh, that's not Jekyll's voice, it's Hyde's, cried Utterson. Down went the door. Poole swung the axe over his shoulder. The blow shook the building, and the red baize door leaped against the locked hinges. Dismal screech, as of mere animal terror, rang from the cabinet. Up went the axe again, and again the panels crashed and the frame bounded. 4 times the blow fell, but the wood was tough and the fittings were of excellent workmanship. It was not until the 5th that the lock burst and the wreck of the door fell inwards on the carpet. The besiegers, appalled by their own riot and the stillness that had succeeded, stood back a little and peered in. There lay the cabinet before their eyes in the quiet lamplight, the good fire glowing and chattering on the hearth, the kettle singing its thin string, a drawer or two open, papers nearly set forth on the business table and near the fire, the things laid out for tea, the quietest room, you would have said, but for the glazed presses full of chemicals, the most commonplace that night in London.
How about one more?
Right in the midst there lay the body of a man sorely contorted and still twitching. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on his back, and beheld the face of Edward Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes of the doctor's bigness. The cords of his face still moved from a semblance of life, but life was quite gone. And by the crushed peel in the hand, and the strong smell of kernels that hung upon the air, Utterson knew that he was looking on the body of himself.
So who does he see? What has just happened?
Hyde's dead.
Hyde's dead. What else does he see in this situation? He sees a phial, a beaker of something in it. So what killed him? How did he die? What?
Poison.
He poisoned himself. And what's he wearing?
Hyde,
Jekyll's clothes. Why don't we go to Julia?
We have come too late, he said sternly, whether to save or punish. Hyde is gone to his hill, and it only remains for us to find the body of your master. The far greater portion of the building was occupied by the theater, which almost the whole ground story and was lighted from above, and by the cabinet which formed an upper story at one end and looked upon the court. A corridor joined the theater to the door on the by street, and with this the cabinet communicated separately by a second flight of stairs. There were besides a few dark closets and a spacious cellar. All these they now thoroughly examined. Each closet needed but a glance, for all were empty and all by the dust that fell from their doors and stood long unopened. The cellar indeed was filled with crazy lumber, mostly dating from the times of the surgeon who was Jekyll's predecessor. But even as they opened the door, they were advertised of the uselessness of further search by the fall of a perfect mat of cobweb which had for years sealed up the entrance. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Poole stamped on the flags of the corridor. He must be buried here, he said, hearkening to the sound. Or he may have fled, said Utterson, and he turned to examine the door in the by street. It was locked, and lying nearby on the flags, they found the key, already stained with the rest. This does not look like use, observed the lawyer. Use, echoed Poole. Do you not see, sir? It is broken, much as if a man had stamped on it. I continued Utterson, and the fractures too are rusty. The 2 men looked at each other with a scare. This is beyond me, said the lawyer. Let us go back to the cabinet.
They mounted the stair in silence, and still with an occasional awestruck glance at the dead body, proceeded more thoroughly to examine the contents of the cabinet. At one table there were traces of chemical work, various measured heaps of some white salt being laid on glass saucers as though for an experiment in which the unhappy man had been preventive. That is the same drug that I was always bringing him, said Poole, and even as he spoke, the kettle with a startling noise boiled over. This brought them to the fireside, where the easy chair was cozily up, and the tea things stood ready to the sitter's elbow, the very sugar in the cup. There were several books on a shelf. One lay beside the tea things open, and Utterson was amazed to find it a copy of pious work, which Jekyll had several times expressed great esteem, annotated in his own hand, with startling blasphemies. Next, in the course of their review of the chamber, the searchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depths they looked with involuntary horror. But it was so turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow, playing on the roof, the fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed front of the presses, and their own pale and fearful countenances stooping to look in.
A cheval glass is a full-length mirror. Why would the doctor need a full-length mirror in his room? Anyway, Walter,
Are we on this glass?
this glass, yeah.
This glass has seen some strange things, sir, whispered Poole, and surely none stranger than itself, echoed the lawyer in the same tones. For what did Jekyll? He caught himself up at the word with a start, and then conquering the weakness. What could Jekyll want it?
He asked the same question. Why does Jekyll need that?
He said, you may say that, said Poole. Next they turned to the business table. On the desk, among the neat array of papers, a large envelope with uppermost and bore in the doctor's hand the name of Mr. Utterson. The lawyer unsealed it, and several enclosures fell to the floor. The first was a will drawn in the same eccentric terms as the one which he had returned 6 months before, to serve as a testament in case of death and as a deed of gift in case of a disappearance. But in place of the name of Edward Hyde, the lawyer with indescribable amazement read the name of Gabriel John Utterson. He looked at Poole and then back at the paper, and last of all at the dead malefactor stretched upon the carpet.
Okay, think about that. Jekyll changed the, what's that name? What's that person called?
The recipient?
Yeah, there's a legal name for it. For instance,
Benefactor?
well, that's the person who gives it, but the person who receives the will or
The
receives.
overseer?
What?
The overseer?
No, that's the.
Oh, it's common, I just can't remember it. But anyway, he changed the name of we'll just use recipient of the estate from Jekyll to Mr. Utterson. Now, if Mr. Utterson's name is on there, the whole estate now would go to Mr. Utterson.
Beneficiary.
Thank you. Who said that?
Tucker said it.
Tucker. Beneficiary. Then that means why didn't Hyde kill Utterson? Because Utterson's going to get the money that Hyde was going to get. So again, I can understand Hyde killing Jekyll to get the money that when Jekyll's dead, he'll get the money. But it's not coming to him now, it's coming to Utterson. So if Hyde knew about it, it was right there in the room, he should have killed Utterson. Of course, all this will be solved in a little bit. But, Ben, you want to read?
Yes. What page?
Okay, we are top of page 51. My head goes round, he said.
My head goes round, he said. He has been all these days in possession. He had no cause to like me, he must have raged. To see himself displaced, and he has not destroyed this document. He caught up the next paper. It was a brief note in the doctor's hand, and dated at the top. Poole, the lawyer, cried. He was alive and here this day. He could not have been disposed of in so short a space. He must still be alive. He must have fled. And then why fled and how? And in that case, can we venture to declare this suicide? Oh, we must be careful. I foresee that we may yet involve your master in some dire
So
catastrophic.
he has evidence because of the date on there that Jekyll was alive this morning. They were thinking he'd been dead a week, but he wasn't. He may still be alive. Yeah.
Why don't you read it, Sir asked Poole, because I fear, replied the lawyer solemnly. God grant I have no cause for it. And with that he brought the paper to his eye and read as the following. My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances I have not penetration to foresee. But my instinct and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he was to place in your hands. If you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll. There
Look,
was
before you go, there's another document that he wants Utterson to read. First, the Lanyon letter, which you will have in the next paragraph, chapter, and then the confession of Dr. Jekyll.
There was a third enclosure, asked Utterson. Here, sir, said Poole, and gave into his hands a considerable package sealed in several places. The lawyer put it in his pocket. I would say nothing of this paper. If your master has fled or is dead, we may at least save his credit. It is now 10. I must go home and read these documents in quiet. But I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the police.
Now think of what you just said. There's a dead body there. They don't call the police. He goes home to read the documents, and he's gonna come back and they're gonna call the police.
Makes sense to me.
What?
That makes sense to me.
Explain. Explain.
Oh, I was just joking.
Oh. Because it doesn't make sense to me. Well, it makes sense because we know why he's doing it, but it seems like in most situations, you got a dead body, you call somebody, I didn't do it, I found him here. Finish it.
They went out, locked the door of the theater behind them, and Utterson, once more leaving the servants, gathered about the fire in the hall. Judge back to his office and read the two narratives in which this mystery was now to be explained.
All right, so if at all possible, I'd love to be able to read this next chapter. It's the next to last chapter. This is Dr. Lanyon's explanation. You will find out, if you have any doubt what's going on here, you'll find out what the solution to the mystery is. But then there's a longer story after that, why did he do it, and how did he do it? So, Hartley.
On the 9th of January, now 4 days ago, I received by evening delivery a registered envelope addressed in the hand of my colleague and old school companion, Henry Jekyll. I was a good deal surprised by this, for we were by no means in the habit of correspondence. I had seen a man dined with him in the night before, but I can imagine nothing in our intercourse that should justify formality and registration. The contents increased my wonder, for this is how the letter ran.
So the words here, those words were Lanyon's. The next words are a letter by Jekyll to Lanyon. And it reminds me a little bit of Frankenstein, where you don't know who's speaking. You got these different speakers, different letters. If you want to keep reading, that'd be great.
Dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends, and although we may have differed at times on scientific questions, I cannot remember, at least on my side, any break in our affection. There was never a day when, if you had said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend upon you, I would not have sacrificed my left hand to help you. Lanyon, my life, Lanyon, my life, my honor, my reason, you are all at your mercy. If you fail me tonight, I am lost. You might suppose after this
Preface.
preface that I am going to ask you for something dishonorable to judge for yourself.
All right, Jeff.
I want you to postpone all their engagements for tonight. Even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor to take a cab, must prepare to be absent before.
this letter in your hand. Consultation. Drive straight to my house. Pool, my father, has his orders. You will find him waiting for your arrival with a locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone and open the glazed press, letter E on the left hand. Breaking the lock of it to be shut, and to draw out with all its contents as they stand, the fourth drawer from the top, or the third from the bottom. In my extreme distress of mind, I have one fear of misdirecting you. Even if I am in error, you may know the right drawer by its contents. Some powders, file, and a paper book. This drawer I beg of you to carry back with you to Cavendish Square exactly as it stands.
That is the first part of the service. Now for the second. You should be back. If you set out at once of the receipt of this long before midnight, but I will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of one of those obstacles that can neither be prevented nor foreseen, but because an hour when your servants are in bed is to be preferred for what will then remain to do it. At midnight then I have to ask you to be alone in your consulting room to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and to place in his hands the drawer that you will have bought with you for my cabinet. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards, if you insist upon an explanation, you will have misunderstood that these arrangements are of capital importance, and that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they must appear, you might have charged your conscience with my debt, or the shipwreck of my reason.
Can I use the restroom?
Yeah. I forget about it.
Okay, so this is for next period, not this one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It's negative. It might be very good.
My grades were not good this past
Yeah,
year.
Well, you can do something about that in here. I don't know about the other place. All right, let me finish for us. You get the situation, one night, this is obviously before Lanyon died, but he got a letter saying, from Jekyll saying, go to my room in my laboratory, and get a file out. It's got some medicine in it. And I want you to go back to your house, and at midnight, somebody's going to knock on your door, let him in. That's all you have to do. And so he says, confident as I am that you will not trifle with this appeal, my heart sinks and my hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour in a strange place, laboring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate. And yet well aware that if you will but punctually serve me, my troubles will roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend H.J. P.S. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter not reach come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it shall be most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then be already too late, and if that night passes without event, you will know that you have been seen the last of Dr. Jekyll. You see the situation. Dr. Jekyll needs some sort of medicine that Utterson will have gotten, and when somebody comes to the door, a messenger, he calls him, Utterson will give him the package with the medicine in it. Let me keep reading. Upon the reading of this letter, now these are the words of Lanyon, I made sure my colleague was insane. But till that was proved beyond possibility of a doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood of this farrago, remember that was one of our words, the less I was in position to judge of its importance. An appeal so worded could not yet be set aside without grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from the table, got into my hansom, which is a carriage, and drove straight to Dr. Jekyll's house. The butler was awakened by my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instruction and had sent at once for a locksmith and carpenter. The tradesmen came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in a body to old Denman Surgical Theater, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is most conveniently entered. The door was very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter vowed he would have great trouble and have to do much damage if force were to be used, and the locksmith was near despair. But this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work, the door stood open. The press marked E was unlocked. I took out the drawer, had it filled with straw and tied on a sheet, and returned it to Cavendish Square. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were nearly enough to made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so that it was plain they were of Dr. Jekyll's private manufacture. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to be a simple crystalline salt of a white color. The phial to which I next turned my attention might have been about half full of a blood red liquor, which was highly pungent to the sense of smell and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. At the other ingredients I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years. Now, this book is actually interesting. It's a book of dates and things that happened. It says, these covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries caused nearly a year ago, ceased nearly a year ago, and quite abruptly. Here and there, a brief remark was appended to a date, usually no more than a single word, double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of 100 entries. And once very early in the list, and followed by several marks of exclamation. Total failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here was a phial of some salt, and a record of a series of experiments that had led, like too many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honor, sanity, or life of my flighty colleague? If his messenger could go to one place, why could not he go also to another? And even granting some impediment, why was this gentleman to be received by me in secret? The more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease. And though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded an old revolver that I might be found in the posture of self-defense. 12 o'clock had scarcely rung out over London ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I went myself at the summons and found a small man, notice the description, crouching against the pillar of the portico. "Are you come from Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He told me yes, by a constrained gesture. When I had bidden him to enter, he did not obey me without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open, and at the sight I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand readily upon my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much was certain. He was small, as I've said. I was struck besides with the shocking expression of his face. He's describing Mr. Hyde, of course, and his remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great debility of constitution, and last but not least, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. This bore some resemblance to incipient rigor, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. At the time I sat down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste, and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. But I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the cause in the nature of man, and to turn on some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. This person, who had thus, from the first moment of his entrance, struck me what I cannot describe as a disagreeable curiosity, was dressed in a fashion that would have made an ordinary person laughable. His clothes, that is to say, although they were rich and sober fabric, were enormously too large for him in every measurement. The trousers hanging on his legs and rolled up to keep them from the ground, the waist of the coat below his haunches, and a collar sprawling wide upon his shoulders. Strange to relate, this ludicrous accoutrement was far from moving me to laughter. Rather, there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature that now feared me, faced me, something seizing, surprising, revolting. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in with and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character, there was something that was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, his status in the world. So this guy, Hyde, is dressed in clothes too big for him. These observations, though have taken so great a space to be set down in, were yet the work of a few seconds. Our visitor was indeed on fire with somber excitement. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" And so lively was his impatience that he even laid his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious at my touch of a certain icy pang along my blood. "Come, sir. You forget that I have not the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated, if you please." And I showed him an example and set myself down in my customary seat, and with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to a patient as the lateness of the hour, the nature of my preoccupations, and the horror I had of my visitor would suffer me to muster. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon," he replied civilly enough. "What you say is indeed well founded, and my impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. I come here at the instance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment." And I understood. He paused and put his hand to his throat, and I could see, in spite of his collected manner, that he was wrestling against the approaches of an hysteria. I understood a drawer. But here I took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps of my own curiosity. "There it is, sir," pointing to the drawer, where it lay on the floor beside a table, still covered with the sheet. He sprang to it. Notice the animal imagery. He sprang to it and then paused and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsion action of his jaws, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason. "Compose yourself," said I. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as with the decision of despair, plucked away the sheet. At sight of the contents, he uttered one loud sob of such immense relief that I sat petrified, and the next moment in a voice he was already fairly well under control. "Have you a graduated glass?" he said. He asked. I rose from my table with something of an effort and gave him what he asked. He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few minims of the red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was at first a reddish hue, began in proportion as the crystals melted to brighten in color, to effervesce audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapor. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the evolution ceased, and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a weird watery green. My visitor, who had watched these metamorphoses with a keen eye, smiled and set down the glass on the table, and then turned and looked upon me with air scrutiny. I'm just going to read to the bottom. "And now," he said, "to settle what remains. This is Hyde. Will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and go forth from your house without further parley? Or has the greed of curiosity too much command of you? Think before you answer, but it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man a mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches to the soul. or if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid upon you here in this room upon the instant, and your sight to be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan. Sir, said I, affecting a coolness that I was far from truly possessing, you speak enigmas, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no strong impression of belief. But I have gone too far in this way of inexplicable service to pause before I see the end. It is well, replied the visitor. Lanyon, we might be able to finish it. Lanyon, you remember your vows? What follows is under the seal of your profession. And now you have so long been down to the most narrow and materialistic views. You who have denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, behold. And look what happens as we finish. He put the glass to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table, held on, staring with injected eyes, gaping with open mouth. And as I looked, there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell, his face suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And the next moment, I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arm raised to shield me from that prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. Oh God, I screamed, and oh God, again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken, and half fainting, and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. So, Mr. Hyde takes the medicine, drinks it, and in front of Lanyon, changes from Mr. Hyde into Dr. Jekyll. What he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it. And yet now, when that night has faded from my eyes, I ask myself to believe it. Guys, and let me just finish it, just a couple of thoughts here. And I cannot answer it. Well, they're not going to let us do that. Isn't that annoying?
Yeah.
When you can't get something done because somebody got there.
Yeah.
I will, we'll finish this tomorrow. And we'll see.
He didn't even decide a date for it, though. He said this was disgusting. What? Oh, what?
Yeah.
I think you guys should know by now, I suck at spelling.
Okay, so all So they weren't the best?
They weren't the best.
Were there any A's? Guessing it's probably harder.
It was Emma.
Oh gosh, that is so bad.
We're gonna get it in my eye.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was clean. Oh, it's come back.
It's so terrible. I can
Not super A's.
Oh, that's an A. That's not
We got
terrible.
B's and an A.
Okay.
I don't know what you're expecting.
I was hoping for an A, but this is nice.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're pleased.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it is.
And then,
Yeah, yeah.
well, you're not gonna see.
Is it bad?
I'll let you decide. It was the highest grade. That's a C.
Yeah.
No, is it?
Yeah, it could have been a B.
Yep. David, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.